Everybody, welcome. Good afternoon. They're all having a great Davos. My name is Brad Stone. I run the technology coverage at Bloomberg. More relevantly, I'm also the daughter. Sorry.
Are you coming out?
Yeah.
Listen to me.
I'm the father of 3 teenage daughters. Twin 16-year-olds and a 17-year-old. I have proudly raised them with my wife and the CEOs of Facebook and Instagram and Google and YouTube. I hope they pitch in for college. But the impact of technology on our kids is of foremost importance. Obviously, for me, it's something all parents are thinking about right now. And this panel is going to be devoted to the science. What does the science tell us about the impact of technology on children? What do we know? What don't we know? And what can we do to safeguard the long-term development of this generation? So let me introduce the panel. We'll start with Dr. Jim Winston, trustee of the Winston Family Foundation and a clinician with 30 years of experience treating addiction. Next to him, Dr. Mitch Prinstein, Chief Science Officer of the American Psychological Association. Dr. Michael Rich, the founder of the Digital Wellness Lab at Boston Children's Hospital. And Dr. Stacy, Drury, Psychiatrist-in-Chief at Boston Children's Hospital. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Stacy, why don't we start with you and go down the panel. Just talk a little bit about your practice and your kind of experience in this field.
So I am a child psychiatrist, which means that I went to med school. So I just sometimes put that in there, not because of anything other than I learned probably less about diagnosing and measurement than we do in psychology training. And my entire career has been focused on understanding the biological consequences of trauma and how that happens to influence the neurobiology of the developing brain, both within and across generations with the specific benefits and health disparities. And so how I come into this is coming in at a time when we're in a massive mental health care crisis. And I'm a scientist and a clinician at the same time. So for me, it's incredibly important to have the science drive clinical practice. And one of the challenges is that science is slow, right? And we are always behind in terms of getting clear, precise answers. And then we're even further behind in disseminating the actual science to the people that it matters most to, which in this case is parents and teenagers.
And teachers.
And teachers, right? And so I come to this from kind of an anxiety standpoint. My kids are needed that transition, but it wasn't fun. And I really used the data that was available to help guide. The things that I knew were that it interferes with sleep.
Well, actually, let's get to that. Let's do the introductions.
Okay, sorry.
Mike.
So I am a pediatrician who specializes in adolescent medicine, which is healthcare for people healthy from the neck down. And the trouble they get into is acne, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It all happens in chairs. At any rate, I trained as a pediatrician and as an adolescent medicine specialist, but I spent my wicked youth in the film industry as a screenwriter and filmmaker before I had a midlife crisis and threw me to medical school. But what really I understood as I was coming up in my training is how important the screens in kids' lives are to their health, their physical, mental, and social health, and their development. In positive as well as negative ways. And in many ways, I'm a pragmatist in the sense that, yes, it would be great if we didn't have these things, but we have them and we've got to learn to live well with them. And I use the word well in both senses. And I think, so I am founder and director of something called the Digital Wellness Lab, which is an attempt to, much like the MIT Media Lab, to bring all the stakeholders together to work with them. It's not going to be fixed by scientists or clinicians alone. It's going to have to be fixed by all of us. And I also founded a clinic for interactive media and internet disorders, which is for those kids who have gone down the rabbit hole, gaming, social media, information binging, and such. So, great.
Mitch.
Thanks so much. I'm a scientist in clinical child and adolescent psychology. For about 25 years, I've been studying how kids get along with other kids and what those relationships look like. About 15 years ago, we started realizing, in part from the kids, that if you were not looking at online relationships, you were not capturing what relationships look like anymore. And of course, over the last 15 years, that has only become more and more and more so. About 5 years ago or so, we were able to start the Winston Center, which was dedicated specifically to understanding the ways in which social media and technology devices might be changing the development of adolescents' brains, as well as other areas of psychological adjustment and development. That's been our core focus for about 5 years now. And about 3 years ago, I started as the Chief Science Officer at the American Psychological Association. Quite interestingly, at that time, there started to be a great interest in knowing what the synthesis of psychological science might be on social media and adolescent development. So it happened to be an interesting time to be in the right place. And just about a year ago, we issued a health advisory synthesizing all of the research on this area and identifying exactly what we know scientifically about technology and adolescent development.
Great, and we're going to get into that. Jim, tell us a little bit about your practice.
So I'm the outlier here. I have a PhD in psych, but I'm not a scientist or an academic. I'm a clinician. For about 30 years now, I started in a federal prison running a drug program, which has been my favorite job ever to date. I moved to Miami, had a job as clinical supervisor of an adolescent sex offender treatment program. So I've been in the trenches. And then I started a private practice. I am a father of 2 boys, so I came to this sort of by accident. This wasn't an intentional thing in the beginning, just getting pissed off, walking my kids to school and being bumped into all the time, and without them looking out. So the device had a powerful hypnotic effect on the upper school students, and it registered to me as somebody who's been in addiction that this looked like every other addiction, right? The interference with basic self-care. So I began to get in the weeds and had access to some money, started this thing at UNC Chapel Hill where I got my PhD, and got more and more in the weeds on why this is happening. The subspecialty is the whole theory of attachment and how kids are supposed to attach given their evolutionary protocol. And sort of came to the conclusion that the device, given how much time kids are spending on it, is corrupting that evolutionary development.
Wonderful. And by the way, the sight of a teenager crossing the street, looking at their phone, not looking up, is a common one in my community. Now, so maybe you have just joined us. We have plenty of seats over here, so please kind of fill in. If you're late, this panel is devoted to the science, what we know concretely about the ways technology are affecting our kids' brains and what we don't know. So let's roll back to the panel. Stacy, you started to address it. For me, it's like talking about like the animals as they've already left the barn, because my kids have grown up with technology, like probably a lot of parents. We set limits, gradually they wither away. What impact has all of this relentless screen time and social media? What do we know about the impact it's had on children's brains?
So I'm gonna pick one and then hand it down the line. And I'm gonna focus on my favorite one, not because I'm good at it, but because I actually think it's a powerful protective factor, and that's sleep. Right? And so what we do know is that having a phone in your room disrupts everybody's sleep. Right? And the first thing that they did was they changed the color, right? And then tech created the glasses that also keep the light from entering your eyes. But sleep is disrupted. Right, and it's disrupted because it's easily accessible. It's sitting there in your bedroom, and so we know that it's disrupting sleep. And so when we disrupt sleep, have any of you ever taken an airplane to a different country and entered a different time zone? Right, and so you didn't have the right sleep. And how was your focus the next day? Terrible, right? How was your short-term memory? Terrible. How was your appetite? Unpredictable, right? And you were not your shiny, happy, normal self. So anytime we disrupt sleep, and we disrupt it chronically, we are driving biologic changes in the attentional mechanisms, our memory systems, and our sort of appetite and metabolic systems. So that is clear, right? And so that is one piece that I will say that I think is really important. It's also important for everyone in the room.
I was going to say, is it particularly relevant for kids? Are they more
It is
susceptible?
particularly relevant for kids, and particularly younger kids and then adolescents, because of one factor. It's the more your brain is growing, the more your brain needs sleep. In sleep, your brain actually consolidates memories. It is actually the most important time to remember things and to put it into your long-term memory. So for young kids as well as adolescents, that is incredibly important to learning everything. So not just social emotional learning, but every fact. If you're ever crammed for a test, you could get that information out the next day, but it was not happily in your long-term memory because you didn't sleep. So the adolescent brain in particular is learning a whole bunch of things all at once, right? So they are at this uniquely sensitive time period for social interactions with peers, for the expected, and this is painful to say, separation from my parents, and all of that huge amount of information that we are trying to get them to learn, in particular in high school, right? So it's a huge amount of information, much more than they're younger. Their brains are uniquely sensitive, and the actual amount of sleep they're getting is way less than what they should be getting.
Although my kids are just fine sleeping until 11:30 on a weekend afternoon.
So that is actually even more important, which is the inconsistent sleep pattern is equally detrimental.
And it's because they're in sleep deficit, right? Actually, they're making up on weekends.
Well, Michael, I want to let you answer this question about what the science is telling us right now on the impact of tech on kids' brains. But I just want to say I'm particularly curious about its impact on attention and the ability of this generation to read, to focus, to engage in deep concentration. But go ahead and answer, answer the broad question.
Yeah, okay. I'll take the daytime part of the kid. And, I think that what we see in all of us is the dread FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. What kids have, layers on top of that, possibly even more powerful, is what we're calling FOBO. Fear of being left out. Fear that if I don't respond to that text in 3 nanoseconds, they're going to think I'm ghosting them, and really feeling like if I belong, if I matter, I'm going to get more likes and I'm going to get them faster, et cetera, et cetera. So they are sort of driven to feel that they are part of a community, that they are part of a connection. The reality is this connection is attenuated. It is very weak. It feels like connection, but what's actually happened is that these kids, instead of getting together in real life, IRL, looking each other in the eyes, risking feeling awkward, risking feeling like they'll be, teased or whatever, but really getting to know someone. They use these devices to distance themselves actually from each other, to their walls, not bridges, other people. And so I think that it's really important to recognize that what they are taking in is vast volumes, much of which is not used well. Much of it is not needed. In fact, when you talk to teachers, they say that particularly older teachers, they said, we have gone from teaching kids to research something, to do deep dives and learn something, to filtering out what is unnecessary because it's coming at them so fast. And so I think that it's really important for us to realize that these are power tools. These are not treats. These are not toys. These are not things that need to be, given when a kid gets straight A's or taken away when they punch their sister. But a power tool like an automobile that they need to be provided with when they need that tool. I'm not saying want, I'm saying need that tool. And because everyone else has one is not a good reason to get a phone. But when they need it, when they can take responsibility with it, we wait until they're old enough to drive a car. And then we sit next to them white knuckle while they learn to drive. And we should do exactly the same thing with phones and with social media and with anything when we introduce it to them at a time when we believe that they respect themselves and others enough to be good citizens in that space.
Mitch, what are we seeing in the lab and behavioral studies about the impact of this technology on kids?
Yeah, so we have a rapidly accumulating data base now that we can see across hundreds and hundreds of studies now. There is the potential for benefit if we change everything about the devices and platforms, but in the absence of that, there are a few things. One, we're seeing a tremendous amount of social comparison processes, and because most people are putting up their best selves, we're seeing mostly upward comparisons. Girls in particular are especially likely to experience anxiety, depression, and weight-related behaviors as a result of the time that they've spent social comparison online. We're seeing a lot of exposure to discrimination, hate, and bullying. Interestingly, even for kids who are experiencing discrimination or bullying offline, the experience of that same experience, those same acts online is hurting them more. And the reason why is because what's happening online is usually anonymous, it's usually harsher, and there's more pile-on with people liking and commenting. We're seeing a lot of what we're now calling digital stress. And think about this, we didn't have this when most of us were growing up. You went home, there was no device, and you just did what you wanted to do. But kids are now telling us that they are experiencing notification overload, cognitive overload of information, fear of missing out, and a feeling that when they do post something, they have to stare at their phone for a half an hour hitting refresh to make sure that that post is being received in the intended way and they're not getting canceled. Digital stress predicts depression a year later. We're seeing the lack of sleep and also the lack of exercise. We also are spending a lot of time looking, there's more. We're seeing more addictive behaviors, right? We're seeing more peer influence, especially towards negative behaviors. You see 10 likes on a post, you don't think, that's weird, 10 people like that dangerous behavior. You think, oh, everyone probably likes that dangerous behavior. But we're also seeing effects on the brain. And briefly, I'll just say that, when you notice that a child is beginning to go through puberty, there are observable signs in their body, perhaps that we can see, that indicates they're starting to mature. That means that 2 years ago, their brain started to mature. And when that happens, the brain matures one region at a time. The first is the eye-rolling region. The reason why that's happening is because of extra dopamine and oxytocin receptors that are happening in the brain. That makes them very interested in hanging out with their peers. 60,000 years ago, that made good sense. They were like, get out of the house, go hunt, and go do things on your own. For now, they live in the basement till God knows when. So the thing that's important with that is there's a natural biological craving for the kind of social feedback that a phone gives you 24/7 access to. So as kids are spending so much time online, we're now showing in our lab that it's changing both the size and the function of the brain over time. The more you pick up your phone in 6th grade, when kids are about 11, the more developed the areas of the brain are that make you sensitive to constantly wanting to get feedback about yourself. And the less development you're getting in the prefrontal cortex that allows you to have control and thoughtful inhibition. So just a piece, that's a lot, I realize, but there's a lot of science here in this area, I think enough for us to be concerned.
Yeah. Jim, how is this manifesting in the behaviors of the patients that you're seeing in your practice?
So I want to kind of flip back to this whole attachment notion, right? So I think we all in our Psych 101 classes saw the monkey attached to just the fur that looked like a monkey, right? And it clung to it, but it wasn't real food also. So attachment is a dimensional experience between caretakers and kids, right? You've got touch, you've got eye contact, you have all the visceral elements. Now, with the introduction of these devices, kids, now they're getting them in 6, 7, and in the school where my kids, most first graders have phones, almost all of you. And the attachment, the number of hours spent on a device through a screen is going up all the time now. It's 8, 9 hours a day. My concern, having worked in the field of addiction and worked with very intelligent people who, when it comes down to it, feel like alcohol, let's say, is oxygen. if you're not an alcoholic, it's kind of weird, but it is access to primitive part of the brain. So even the top-down goal-directed behaviors can't compete with that. The imperative from those bottom-up kind of primitive mechanisms overwhelm any well-intentioned goal-directed behavior. So my concern, and I tag it to the increase in depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation, is that because kids are spending 8 hours a day, so that means they're not spending it connecting to their parents or peers, they're connecting through a screen. And I call that pseudo-connecting, and I don't think it's giving the brain actual nutrition. I think it's giving the brain manufacture, and I think that's a contributing variable. So that's really my focus, and that's why I keep spouting this draconian measure of really trying to protect the adolescent brain, the neurobiological arc, and to at least warn kids of the addictive potential of the device itself. We all know about alcohol and how poisonous it is, and not all of us become alcoholics, thank God. But at least the information is out there. Nobody can say it's not damaging or potentially damaging. I would hope, Margarita and I have talked about this, that at a certain point that becomes either the World Health Organization or some sort of health organization recognizing how powerfully addictive these devices are designed to capture attention. If we as adults, I mean, if I were going to take your phones for 3 days, how many of you would easily give them up? Nobody. Right? So, more accidents and deaths happen in cars, at least in the US, from texting than from alcohol now. If it's that powerful for adults, the difficulty regulating, imagine the effect on our kids who are by definition impulsive, cannot regulate, have difficulty understanding future consequence. So that's really my focus.
Can I jump on this? Because I want to tell a story that relates to that Harlow experiment. This is my drunk monkey story. So you guys have not heard a drunk monkey story, but I have a great slide of a drunk monkey. So why am I talking about a drunk monkey? Well, so Steve Sumi had one of the best jobs in the world where he got to look at the role of attachment in non-human primates, so in a rhesus macaque. So the rhesus macaque is very much like us, and they're very maternally driven. So the first 2 years of life, the rhesus macaque basically spends on the ventrum of mom and is there in close contact the entire time. And then you drop them off and they go play with their friends and they develop into the tribes or groups of monkeys out there. And so what Steve Simi did was he took a bunch of monkeys, and we'll say their rate of development is about 1 to 4, right? So at 2 years, it's about the equivalent of an 8-year-old child. And he took them, and instead of them being reared with their mother, he reared them in what I like to call the adolescent dorm. So they were peer-reared animals. And the peer-reared animals didn't do as well, right? They had poor social cues, they had poor social skills, they had poor everything. And the ones that lived with mom did much better. And there were some genetic variations that in some cases made the animals that were peer-reared much more susceptible to depression and poor social skills and all these other things. But what was really striking was that same genetic variation, when you put that baby monkey with its mom for 2 years, made it resistant to an alcohol abuse paradigm. So the combination of a genetic risk with early secure attachment to a caregiver blocked the effect of an addictive substance. And so I think that's a really important piece because this model of attachment speaks to the importance of eye contact, eye gaze, and the interaction with young children in particular that has to come from caregivers, teachers, and safe people. So when we swap out that bi-directional interaction that is social emotional connectivity in kids under the age of 8 with an iPad, we are basically recreating parts of that experiment and making them much more susceptible to the neurobiologic changes that predispose to depression, anxiety.
But let's also acknowledge the futility of rolling back the clock and taking the iPads and the phones entirely out of the hands of our kids, and maybe speak to like how we find the balance and what the research tells us, or if there's forthcoming research we're waiting for about that takes into account the reality. Like we're not walking away from these technologies, or we're going to pry the phones out of the hands of our kids, and how do we navigate a safe path?
Well, some of it's not necessarily rolling back the clock. The AI technology that is keeping kids on for hours at a time, so much so that they report to us that it's interfering with their daily roles and routines, that they're trying to make sure they have nonstop access to it. That's relatively new. The extent to which kids are getting them younger and the devices younger and younger, that's relatively new. The fact that we found out that even the people who develop these platforms won't let their kids anywhere near them suggests that that's a really important message that tells us that, some of the concerns are baked in and there's knowledge about that. So I think that to some extent, the pragmatic perspective is absolutely warranted, but let's not give up on what is relatively new and could be made elective. Let kids opt in or out of some of this. Let parents wait until they give their kids the device. And there's no psychological science that says that kids suffer at all by waiting.
I'd also just like to add what I recall and have read in the 50s and 60s, everybody drank and drive. And it wasn't until I think it was 1972 that a woman who lost her daughter to a drunk driver started Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And now the social norm is you don't get in a car and drive. It's been weapon, even the alcohol industry is all about that. So I'm not as pessimistic as the genie's out of the bottle, although it is. I really think that if we can highlight this is an addictive product for kids, you wouldn't give your kid cocaine. Or let's say, since it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier, you wouldn't put a slot machine in your kid's bedroom. I think it's going to wake parents up to, wow, because the folks I talk to, well-intentioned, great parents, none of them know this. And when I share, which I'm a buzzkill at any party, about this effect, they're like, holy cow, I never knew, now I'm going to rethink this. And I think that if we could populate a national educational campaign that really highlights with some of the research that's coming out and get parents to understand that this is not a neutral device. It is calling for kids' attention all the time, and they are incapable of regulating that hyperstimulation. That we're going to find parents starting to demand technological change. For example, I've often thought about trying to shame the tech companies into designing a phone that only lets your kid go text or call, does not have access to the internet. I gave my son a flip phone and he broke it on purpose because he was so embarrassed. He didn't want to take it to school. I'm hopeful that if more parents can understand the dynamic of this device and what it is doing, it's certainly through that neurobiological arc where more of the brain is kind of filled up with nutritional, that I think parents are going to buy on. The other thing is, I think we need sort of like the principle of AA. I mean, I've been in this business for a long time. It's really not so much what happens in the rooms. It's that you create a community of people who aren't drinking. And it becomes an antidote to their historical way of having fun, looking cool. We have to create that at a national level of groups of families where my kids were invited to iPad parties. And they didn't go because they didn't have one. But we have to create a separate community structure that really attends to those of us who really understand this and want kids to participate in that more natural flow.
Michael, I can win, but I also want you to answer, have Silicon Valley companies totally abdicated their public health responsibility?
Up until now, yes. But I think that we are hopefully making some inroads with them where they understand that it may not be the best business decision to ignore the well-being of those who are using their products. The tobacco companies have a terrible business model, right? They lose millions of people every year. They kill their customers, right? And I think that we're starting to see that issue with this. Although the difference is that it's less graphic and it's more prolonged, if you will. And I will extend, what Jim says is absolutely right about social norms. And I think I hate to be more cynical than you. I know you want to own that. But I don't think it's just that they don't know that it's a problem. I don't think they believe it because these are these are the parents. And it's because they use their phones and devices that way, right? And I one of the things that I think is most important for parents to do is model the behavior they want to see in their kids. And if dad is looking at that all-important email after hours and yelling at the kid, turn off your video game, it's the height of hypocrisy for the kid, right? They listen to about 1% of what we say and 100% of what we do. And so I think that it's a bigger hill to climb even than knowing this. I think they've got to believe it and understand that. And then once they get there, they need to not just provide phones to the kids at a certain age, whatever that is determined to be, but they need to teach them to use it just the way we teach them to use normally, right? Sit down beside them and help them learn to use it. Be explicit about what they can do with it and when and where they can do that, but also be explicit about what they should do with it, what they can't do with it, and where they should and shouldn't go, and what the consequences should be if they misuse it. Because then, before the kid gets the phone, then they will say, well, maybe I should lose it for a week. Once they have the phone, they would never agree to that. But if you do it that way, there's ownership in that decision. That's the decision that they make that would be best. So I think it's really important to realize that these are incredibly powerful tools, more than 1 million times more powerful than the computer that invented us on the moon. And they're in our kids' pockets, and frankly, they're 99.9% distraction.
I'm so excited that I get to be the optimist here, because that has not been my role at all this week. And so one of the things I will say is that the approach of keeping your child away from the phone for as long as possible is something that will work for kids that have never had one.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But we also have a huge population of kids that are in that 10 to 18 range who have had them, right? So I don't want to give up on them. But what I have learned, and I will say that this week has been quite striking because there's been a group of teenage kids that have been coming to our sessions, is that when we provide the information about how tech is manipulating them, how tech is using their data, I had the most wonderful thing that a child said to me all week. He said, it's child labor. They are using me, they're making money off me, and these are not paying me. And so I actually believe if we get this information to teenagers and we give them that information in a way that is motivating to them, right? So that means it has nothing to do with us controlling their lives, that we could help, with their help, create a narrative that they spread. Because I can tell you that 12-year-old was like, I am not working for them anymore. And I said, I need you to tell all those other children that, right? And I think as we let them work with us to develop that messaging, we have a really important opportunity to have them shift that narrative for us. And I've seen it where they're like, I have to protect my little sister.
Yeah.
And so I do have a little bit of hope. And like for the new ones, like let's not have them have the
Can
fun.
we also just acknowledge though that there is a utility, like, it's our kids' wallet. It's how they navigate the buses. Educators, schools are putting iPads and laptops in our kids' hands, in addition to the social, benefit. So, Mitch, how do we tap some of their benefits? It's, I went to the library to look things up on the Encyclopedia Britannica, dating myself. Kids have enormous knowledge at their disposal. How do we tap the benefits while limiting the harms?
We can't give kids a device without extensive training on how to use it safely. In the same way that we don't give kids keys to a car until they take a written exam and a performance-based exam to make sure they won't hurt themselves or anybody else. Yesterday it was commented, and I agree that we need to change the business model, right? I enrolled my kids, my wife and I enrolled our kids in camp. The camp sent all kinds of forms, to have to fill out. One of them was, do you allow us to take photos of your child, in the mix of all other children, as they're running around camp? And I thought, it's a photo. No one is asking the parents for consent for anything on social media. And it's far more than a photo. It's everything they've ever liked. Every insecurity and question and wondering they've ever had that they typed in the search bar. Anything they've done on any other app. All of that has been collected without consent and used for profit. And I agree. I have done, I don't know how many talks now to schools and groups of middle and high schoolers around the country and help them to lift the veil of those privacy restrictions or lack thereof for themselves. And it is incredibly powerful once we start helping teens feel like they can make autonomous decisions with that knowledge. They currently don't have that knowledge in their species.
Jim, let me ask you one question, and then I think we're getting ready for Q&A. What do we know about the efficacy of digital detox? You mentioned AA. I find camps that take the kids' phones away or even threaten expulsion if they're found with phones to be very appealing. I feel like the kids need a break from their digital lives, and yet they come back and boy, it's 20 minutes and they're back to their old habits. So. Is it digital detox like a valuable tool in the toolkit? And
For what age?
Well, let's be expansive, but of course I'm thinking of it in terms of teenagers. Yeah, but it's probably great for kids of all ages. I would imagine. Is
Great
it
for kids of all ages?
Is it? I'm asking you. Is digital detox? Like considering the inevitability of kids and their phones these days. Would it be valuable for parents, for educators to think about, periods of time, summers without technology?
So I think to Stacy's point, once they have it, you're over the cliff. I think before that, there's real merit in trying to maintain a firewall based on all this information, because detox, as you guys know, is hell, depending on your drug, but it's hell. And it's going to be the same way in terms of if you've been, if I were to take your phone away, you would start to go through withdrawal.
You physically feel it. Like that sensation when you think you've lost your phone. Like what is physiologically happening? Why is my heart?
And that's about your attachment, obviously, and it has neurobiological components.
It might be less the cost of a replacement phone, perhaps.
The child, because they don't pay it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's a much better solution, if you will, to keep the kids sort of virgin. I mean, in this, and that's probably a better term, but they've got they've got computers at school. So it's not like they're going to be tech illiterate. But for me, again, as an addiction guy, the ability to carry a phone around in your pocket makes all the difference in terms of the development of that addictive relationship. And to keep it out of kids' hands until they show an ability to regulate themselves. And as Mitch talked about, the prefrontal cortex really is the last part of the brain to develop. It really doesn't develop fully until 22, 25. So it's all gas and no brain.
Yeah. So what you're saying, 4 weeks at theater camp without their phone, it's not going to make much
of one to come back to. It's like somebody going to treatment.
Yeah.
I mean,
come back and say, here's a drink.
Well, and treatment is notoriously unsuccessful.
Yeah. I think it also depends on how you use it. I have a friend and colleague who actually founded the Webby Awards, is a website designer, a filmmaker.
Tiffany?
Tiffany Schlein.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
she-
you know Tiffany. Oh, she is? Okay. So I'm going to tell, if you don't mind, I'll tell Tiffany's story. She and her family, she has 2 teenage daughters. Her husband is a robotics professor at Berkeley. Since the beginning, they have observed a tech Shabbat. They have turned off all their phones, all their devices, including televisions, for 24 hours a week. She's written a book called Living 24/6. And the benefits they get from that is that they lower their hyperstimulation. They take a moment and stuff. And then they are actually more productive in the times they are using the technology. And so I think that we can also think, instead of thinking, oh my God, you're addicted, let's detox you, and then, you rush out and detox 3 or 4 times. How about we start with, living consciously, using it mindfully, which also means turning it off mindfully when it's not the best tool for the job, and taking care of this.
I love the idea of new relevance for rituals like Shabbat.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say that what that type of activity does ties into what Jim was talking about, right? Because it brings in the attachment component. So if the parent is part of the Shabbat and you play board games and you cheat at Monopoly like I do, and you are creating very, very important skills. Hard to cheat in Candyland, it is much easier to cheat in Monopoly. But that is going to build that attachment relationship with the parent and the siblings and whoever else is in that family. And it's going to tell them that they are super important. And I, as a parent, am going to put my phone down and I'm going to interact with you and I'm going to look at you and I'm going to play with you. And so and the way that you get that is by getting away from this other thing. So it puts the onus on separating from something that pulls me away from the most important drug that we have, which is our social connectedness. And I promise you, and there's a wonderful study about addiction with moms who are opioid dependent. So everybody loves cute baby faces, right? Sorry, back to my babies. But they did an fMRI study where they took moms who were opioid dependent and they showed them different types of baby faces. And there's actually a type of baby face that is most cute. It's the same as the harbor seal face, round, big, giant eyes, right? Much cuter than a longer face. And it's called the baby schema effect, right? And so when moms were addicted, they didn't have a baby schema effect. You treated their addiction or you gave them naloxone, which blocks that receptor. Then all of the dopamine and all of the oxytocin and all of the drug that is social connectedness went back to the right place in the mom's mind. And she redeveloped the baby schema effect, right? So if we want to break that cycle, we need to redevelop the baby schema effect. And how we do that is we tell our children they are valuable and more important than that email, than that text. And we do that by putting our phone down and stopping with them.
I just want to throw in one last piece here. So having been in this field for a long time, when people go through withdrawal, part of the consciousness raising experience is getting them to at least see when that energetic compulsion comes up, right? So, I want to drink. My concern about kids getting phones at 2 is that they won't have any contrast position. So when they go off, it's going to be free fall. So people who started, the study that I always sort of reference is, if you can keep kids off, I think it was nicotine and alcohol from 13 to 19, for every year that you can keep them off, their risk of substance abuse or dependence went down between 4 and 5% a year. So neurobiologically and intuitively, that makes sense. So that's also where this kind of, let's see if we can build a social movement where it's cool to wait and go hang out, because kids who get it early aren't going to have that cognitive sense of, I can feel the pull because it's going to be all they know. And this is not a study, but having seen thousands of people, one of the critical ingredients in sobriety, let's say, is somebody recognizing this impulse to go drink and seeing it dystonically. oh, I don't like that. It's very overwhelming, but I don't like that. That's a key to any recovery process. Without that contrast position, though, our kids are going to be in trouble.
Mitch, and then Mitch was gonna jump in, and then let's take questions. Okay.
What I wanted to jump in with was a question, and to you,
Okay,
if I may.
What do you do?
Sorry. I speak with so many groups of parents, and there are many parents who hear that this has the potential of changing their child's brain development. They know that the social media companies, executives don't give them this to their own kids. They know that there are tremendous risks, and they see their child using it for hours and hours and hours a day. But sometimes parents say, well, it's too late. I already gave them the phone. And what are we really going to do anyway? And we tried, but it was really hard. And, well, they seem well adjusted. So really, what harm is it going to do? I know you can't speak on behalf of all parents, but I'm wondering, what do you imagine might be the resistance of parents hearing information? Do you think, in your profession, that this has not gotten sufficient coverage?
Oh, I think we all,
Right.
as parents, we know.
Or assuming that you know.
We feel it. We don't have to look at the science. You know in your heart
So
that
why?
this is but because I think we also have to acknowledge the tremendous pressure from our kids, from their peers, from society, that brings this technology into our lives. We gave the kids iPads, probably, I don't know, 10 or 11. They were God savers. We were lifesavers. We were, I remember being in an airport terminal lounge, flights hours delayed. Thank heavens we have the iPad. We resisted with the phones. We were the last parents in the school. The happiest I've ever seen my daughter was the day that we caved and we got her a janky old Android. She was so angry. 2 years after that, she got an iPhone, running around the house, so excited. All their friends had it. School assignments were online. It was death by 1,000 blows. You try to model good behavior. I feel the tug of my email and my text messages, and work invades our home life. It's 1,000 surrenders. And so, yes, I've learned a lot in this panel, and I understand the science, and we've lost. And defeat, I don't know what else to say. And I feel like the kids are well adjusted, hope, it's, I can't even justify it or rationalize it. I feel sad because I feel like in some ways I've let my kids down a little bit.
I mean, that is the answer of what needs to be done. Because I think that you're expressing what the vast majority of parents think and feel. And I think that until we are able to emotionally connect with that experience and find a way to help empower parents, if it's helpful, the final thing that I can say is one more piece of science. In our work with 22-year-olds, we have the vast majority saying, I wish my parents did not let me do it when I was at that age. I wish that they did not give in to my tantrums, because now I see the ways in which it's actually hurt me in the long run.
For your concern about those emails at night, I've got a little bit of a tidbit for everybody. Also, for all those people who made faces when you said, what about when you lose your phone? Same thing, what about if I can't answer those emails at night? France has a law that is in force that if your employer sends an email or expects a response after hours, you are due overtime pay. And if you do not get overtime pay, they are fined. That law is on the books in the United States. Nobody knows this, right? But that you are due overtime pay if your boss expects you to respond 24/7. What we've done is taken these devices that said, wow, it's going to make everything so efficient. We're going to have so much free time. And we've turned ourselves into 24/7 workers.
We have time for some questions?
Yeah.
Great. Who has questions for our great panel?
Oh, it's again me. What Chip said here did a lot of sense to me. In our society, not so long time ago, it was normal to drive drunk. In France, well, I didn't know even, it was a time when people gave wine to children. It was normal. And they said, okay, why not? It was a time when we were driving all without seat belts. So this is why, for me to say, we have no choice. Everybody is doing that now. This is why we should do. I think we should not accept it because the toxicity, what we are all speaking here about, it's even much worse than wine to children. And I think that when we all will start to speak about it much longer, about what is exactly is happening in the brain of the children, parents like you will not give children the phone before at least 14 or maybe 16 years old. It's just a question you think, it's not so bad, it doesn't look bad. This is exactly, for me it's like a silent time bomb under the feet of our children. It's silent, it looks so nice. They are letting even us have peaceful conversation all evening. Like I know exactly the children when they don't have, they always wants to speak to us. So it is convenient for everybody. But if we give to the parents this information, exactly what is going on exactly in the brain from medical point of view, not just from kind of social behavior, I think most of the parents will find the strength inside of them. I even, it's very bad to say, but I, to some people who have really addicted children, I have children about dogs. My neighbor was noise, screaming, so, and then the mother came to us 3 days. And she said her daughter was a detox, 3 days of detox, digital detox. The daughter was hitting her head against the wall. She was throwing the chairs against the wall. And I have another friend, 11 years old son. As I spoke to her, by the way, many times, oh, my son is not addicted. No, I'm saying, he just plays sometimes, it's okay. Are you sure? Check. And she did it last year. She left to the vacation, October vacation, 2 weeks, and she hid it in the last second somewhere at home. And suddenly, already in the airport, in the plane, the boy discovered it has not. So the whole for 2 weeks, it was of course catastrophe. But it's important what he said in the flight, in the plane, on the way back. He said, if now we are going home, I don't get it straight away, I'm going to kill myself. He was 11 years old. And this woman, mother, was sure her son is not addicted. And only when I started this conversation, she decided to check. Can you imagine what she was feeling, hearing this from her son?
Well, that makes me wonder, is there a way to take all this burden of responsibility away from parents? Like what could effective, enforceable, legal, public policy look like such that we take this tremendous burden away from parents?
It's starting to happen. So England has created age-informed design. They've passed that. California is trying to do so as well, thinking that that would create a tipping point where then that would change, everything.
China's
China's a very different model.
Yeah.
But yes. China has. It's important for parents to know China has a version of TikTok that they'll allow Chinese children to use, and then they have a version of TikTok for Americans to use.
And they're entirely different.
They're very different.
They have limits on gaming and all that, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they can enforce them in a non-democratic way, of course. But the COSA Act is just a couple signatures away from hopefully coming to the floor right now.
This is in California?
Excuse me, the COSA Act is federal in the States.
Mm-hmm.
France has gotten phones out of the classroom. So there are some things that are happening. It's what's needing is a partnership between parents who, as the consumers, can vote with their choice, right? And the tech companies and legislative efforts and so on and so on. But it's a multi-pronged problem. It's going to take a multi-pronged solution.
And the kids, I don't want to leave the kids out of this. One of the ways that we broke the cigarette smoking in the U.S. was the Truth Initiative,
Mhm.
where they made ads of kids prank calling tobacco execs and dumping body bags at their headquarters and all. And this was kid driven. And what drove them to that is, do you know there are a bunch of fat old men sitting in a back room putting this on you and making money off of you, and they're not smoking. Right?
I also just want to throw in the perspective as a father of 2 boys, and they didn't get phones until they were the older one until he was almost 15. I don't see it as a burden. It was stressful. We had some awful arguments and heartbreak, but I will tell you that because the older one in particular, did deep dives in particular content areas that had remarkable substance, stocks, photography. And my sense is with a phone, he never would have been able to maintain the kind of discipline to have that long form material involvement. So, and it was a, I hate the term, but it was a learning of it, but it was a way to engage, to get really conflictual, and then to try and educate. I know they roll their eyes at me. I would say constantly, I care about your brain, not your image. And they would storm off.
Nice line.
I'm looking at writing that down.
It was hard, but I don't consider it a burden. I think trying to get them to inhabit their future self as much as I do is a really important conceptual framework for them. Because I say, if you don't make good grades at 18 when you're applying to colleges, do you only want to get into the worst? And it enhances that kind of future consequence. So as a parent who's in the middle of it, I just want to say it doesn't feel like a burden. Doesn't mean it's not hard as all get out.
Jim, the sound is here. Maybe let me ask you. Sure.
You just got that scheme.
So was that all accurately represented?
Definitely, it's just very hard to know how to look at them. And yeah, there were just all these different times where I felt left out. But now, looking back at it, I feel like you said, I wouldn't be able to get into stocks and photography if you really understand it the way that I do.
Do you feel like your habits, your ability to focus, your brain is different than your peers who got phones much earlier? Like, do you feel like this has had an impact?
Yeah, definitely. We have a class in my school called Life Skills, and we go around and share how we're feeling and that stuff. And I always feel like I'm like at a higher, happier, more like safe place compared to others. And the phone is one of the only few differences that connects me to all these other people in my class.
You guys have probably all seen this teens gathering in a social situation, all of them independently looking at their phone.
Oh yeah.
I've also seen it, and I take my psychiatry residents to do this. We go out and we go to like bars and watch, and we figure out who's on their first date, right? And then we guess what first date's gonna last, because it's not just teens, right? So when you go on a first date and you are looking at your phone, it is not.
Not a good time. They're on the dating app, on the date.
We are modeling that everywhere we go. So next time you go out to dinner with your partner, right? We like our partners most of the time, right? That's why we trust them, and they're still with us, so that's weird. Or at least in my case. And like, it makes me so angry when he takes this stuff, because it means he's not valuing me. And so I think teaching that lesson, that if the phone is as important as me, then I'm less important, is something we need to be thinking about, because the more we model that, the more our teens see that, and the more the younger kids see that.
And those younger kids, if you go and look at a playground at recess in elementary school, the kids are doing exactly the same thing. The ones that have phones are not playing. They're leaning against the wall, texting, and they're often texting each other, right? Because this is talking, right?
Some of the other studies that are correlated show that if you're at dinner and it's a group of 5 or 6 or 7, if there's a phone out, doesn't even have to be on, but if there's a phone out, remember the metrics of the study, but the level of emotional disclosure and vulnerability goes down. So it really does interfere with what I would call intimacy and that ability to feel safe enough to share emotion. Because how many of you have had the experience of being in a conversation with someone that's pretty intense for you, and the phone rings and they pick it up, and then the whole energetic connection is lost, and there's that anxiety because clearly in that moment they're choosing the phone over you.
We're seeing increases in social anxiety, and we're seeing decreases in romantic relationship skills because of this as well. You don't have to have a spontaneous conversation with the phone. So kids are freezing up when they're ordering food and have to talk to their server.
Yeah.
Are we done?
Yeah, let's get the two
Okay.
questions and then we can.
All right, we're gonna do two more
We
questions.
do rapid fire
Yeah.
questions and answer together.
Yeah, so prevention is better than cure. So 90% we're talking about cure, right, in this panel discussion. Can you prevent it? So France is doing now, and the US is want to do it, but they will do it, but the lobbies will be happy. It's the reality, right? So in my case, what I have done, I changed the community. We a new community where we don't have police.
I mean, we would need a time machine to prevent it, right?
Yeah, it is a choice. It's a choice for your kids, right? In my case, I'm a busy guy. If I end the meeting, just leave the phone turn this side. Tomorrow, sunrise. Nothing is going to be changed. They will not enter the phone. The same thing I'm following in my home, like, it's okay. So we go out, we go for a walk. We need to change.
Yes. Yeah.
If we did not change, and we are writing books, we are talking, it's talking, not walking anymore. So these are love kids. Some of these students are kids. So our neighbor kids, but we need to change ourselves. Parents, we need to change this. Is it important email for now? Okay, tomorrow I can do it. It's all.
Yeah, and I don't think it's hopeless. Like Margarita said, most of us, were in cars without seatbelts once upon a time. Many different socially accepted or socially common behaviors. We changed because we brought our cognitive minds to it and said, this is not worth the risk. And I don't feel hopeless. I think there's a lot of hard work in front of us.
And we don't even have to go back that far. If you remember during the pandemic, a lot of us were doing what was then called doom scrolling. And that was a social media behavior. We talked about it. We talked about it with others and said, oh, don't do that. There were things put into social media where as you were scrolling, it said, are you doom scrolling? You should stop, don't forget. We've already had success at noticing and labeling a behavior that was making us feel bad. Talking about it socially and creating a norm that we shouldn't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So we can do that. It's just that we need to do that with children. And we need to start labeling these other behaviors as well.
That hasn't got to one kids. Unfortunately, kids today doom scroll farther than they walk in a day. Their thumbs move more and their feet do in a day.
Okay, very quickly.
3 miles.
Firstly, thank you. It's been an amazing session. My quick, and I hope it might be quite a dumb question, but in terms of waking us up and shocking us, you're talking about affecting the development of the prefrontal cortex. Is that, as I said, maybe so, is that a visible thing? Are elements of the brain stunted in growth? Is that
physically
something that could be visibly seen by parents and go, "Oof."
Yeah, so it's not structural where you're actually seeing the size of the prefrontal cortex different, but when they're asked to engage in a task where they would need to show the ability to stop themselves, you see less activation
Right.
in that area. Similarly, there was an interesting study done where if you showed them an image of something illegal, dangerous, immoral, you would see activation of the prefrontal cortex. If you show them that same image with a bunch of likes, you did not see the activation.
Again, but that's visual, right? In terms of showing
And
the
it's
difference
visual,
of brain
you can
ability
see.
and activity.
Yeah,
That's powerful.
Well,
Thank you.
do we have time for one more?
Take one more,
One
no,
more.
time to stick around.
Yes. Can I just,
I just have 2 quick observations, and it's the thing about partnership. I think is really, really important. My kids are at school in the UK, and they're not allowed internet accessible phones until they're 14 at school. So they carry these bricks around, which they really hate. I never think that's the bus, and that's really the only reason why I want them to have that. They've got access to these tablets when they're at school, but they've got them for that purpose. But it's a balance between what they're being told that they can do, but parents have got to be part of that process as well as the schools and everything else. There's a really interesting public policy discussion going on in the UK. It's not regulation, it's public policy, and some schools are finding it very hard and others are finding it. But the other observation is social media, because I think a lot of the conversation has been about access to social media and the harm from that rather than necessarily the phone itself. I wonder whether there's a discussion that needs to be had more about enforcing the legal access point and maybe even pushing it.
Well, actually, let's end on that with a lightning round. Stacy, starting with you. Should we ban TikTok in the U.S.? Should? Well, I mean, I think it's a real issue for kids now. It's addictive. It might express the values of a perhaps adversarial government. I would love to hear from all five of you. Should we ban TikTok?
No, unless we ban everything else like it. We shouldn't single out one company as if this is evil and that's okay, right? And that would end in all kinds of
I'm gonna say no, one, because it won't matter about being a platform. And two, because if we build in the literacy to use it effectively, it's an incredibly powerful tool for communication. We actually used it to elevate rates of COVID vaccination in our LGBTQ community. We used it, and that was the only way they were going to hear me. And it wasn't me, it was somebody else. But so we need to teach people how to use it, not just kids, but kids really more. And then we need to make sure that we are aware of all the next generation. This is not a fight between them with TikTok, right? It's going to be a different platform in a couple of weeks. I mean, look at what is here today.
Right. Mitch, would you ban TikTok?
I would ban all functions that are based on extending engagement on the device. For
TikTok
youth.
All of them, yes.
Any platform using any function that is built to extend engagement with the platform, at least until 18.
Okay, Jim?
I've never seen TikTok, and when he got a phone, he had to sign a contract that he couldn't keep his phone in his room at night, and he wasn't allowed to get social media until he's 18. So I'm just going to say I don't know.
Okay. Never use TikTok?
What you said is true also.
You can tell us. Jack, look here. You've had a phone for 10 years, right? You've got all the social media accounts. Dad just doesn't know it, right?
I agree with pretty much everyone else on here. If you're going to ban TikTok, you have to ban all the other social media platforms and things like that. Because it won't even take 2 weeks to find alternative. There already are things out there that people go to within a day.
I'll just also weigh in and say I think there is an argument for banning TikTok. I think that it's operated by a company with ties to a government whose values are a lot different than our own. And I think everything you're saying is right about if we were to ban it, it's all Instagram feed. It exists in other ways, but there's an argument that
And I think that changes the conversation.
Yeah, it's a different.
This is a Chinese communist plot.
Yeah.
Right. That's not about what it's doing to us.
Yeah.
Why don't we just cut it off at the knees? Just stop using it.
I would even say, how can we allow our society to poison our children like that? It's not a Chinese, it's not somebody else. It is it's companies. How we allow them to do it? This is for me a really big question.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it there. It's been an hour since I've checked my text messages.